AI system is warming up. Take advantage and just sort of welcome you here. I'm Chris McEvoy, one of the instructors in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation program. And we're going to be talking about business models, the startup environment, customer discovery, and customer development today, and along the way, trying to make it interesting. So by all means, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt me, and I'll be glad to deal with them as best I can. Anybody have any idea how long these things take? Hope it's less than an hour. How many of you here are engineering students? Okay. What about Cranert? Any of those? What are the others? What are some of your other majors here? Everybody's undecided? That can't be.
I'm environmental science.
Okay. Who else?
IT.
Okay. I think we have the most engineering students in our program of any other major school area, and IT is a close second to that. And then the rest is spread out really all over campus. We've had every major offered at Purdue, we've had students from that in our program before. So it's very diverse, it's really interesting. Here we go. Aha, there we are. Now, if this works, we should be able to get started. I'll tell you a little bit about me just for context. One of the things that our program requires that any instructor be an entrepreneur, and I was. I went directly from college, a very small little school in southeastern Indiana called IU. And after I graduated from college, I went to work for General Motors, which at the time, I guess this is going to tell you all that. Yeah, back when General Motors was the biggest corporation in the world. And so that was a 5-year stint that I do not regret at all. I really had a marvelous time, and that was back when I was interested in programming, and that was back when companies had to teach programming to the employees they hired. The universities weren't doing it yet. And so it was a wonderful on-the-job training education, and I really liked it for about 2.5 years. And then I began to think, I'm not sure this is for me. The big corporate environment, very political, lots of nepotism, meaning that the relatives and kids of the people, the managers that work there, tend to be at the front of the line for everything. And there were just a lot of things about it that I decided this wasn't going to be a full-time career for me. And so after 5 years, I left. And then started a software company of my own at the age of 29. And the reason for that was that while I was at GM, they brought in a new development platform, software development platform. And it was a difference of night and day between what we had been doing and what we now were doing in terms of productivity, in terms of accuracy. Just there were no downsides to it. And I realized what a big difference that could make in any industry that had automated early, like General Motors had, and were not taking advantage of these new platforms. So that was where I set my sights. And we ended up making a decision to write software for the insurance industry for a couple of reasons. One is they have tons of money, and two is they had very obsolete software. So that was where we kind of decided to go after. And our first financing was us, and it was kind of you eat what you kill, and so you become very, very interested in having consulting assignments or whatever to bring in enough money to eat. And so there were about 5 or 6 of us, and we did. And then we began to kind of grow and started out with one of the local banks in Indianapolis, Indiana National Bank, and they loaned us, in today's dollars, probably about $750,000. And here we were, a startup, ragtag startup, but we got an SBA guaranteed loan, which means if we defaulted, the SBA Small Business Administration, would come in and guarantee up to 75% of the loan. So they had a lot of protection there. So we had that, and then we got to the point where we had some real growth opportunities, and the bank said, you're at the point now where you really need to go out and look for some venture capital. You need to look for an angel investor. The banks really don't want to get this involved in your business. And so we said, that's fine. So we found an angel investor who plunked $1 million in the company and allowed us to hire. He didn't force us to hire, but he offered his nephew to be on our board, which I gladly accepted. I realized that, I was kind of young and stupid, and somebody who'd been in the finance industry, which this guy had, would be a real help for us. So then things continued to go very, very well. We ended up selling a lot of software to companies, and the bigger companies like Prudential of America were beginning to go overseas, and because of all the things that I liked about the new platform, they wanted us to go with them. They wanted to take our software to what they were going to do outside of the U.S. And so that kind of got us thinking, and we thought, well, if we're going to be going with all these big companies over there, why don't we start marketing on our own in the same areas? And so that caused us to go look for some venture capital. And that was in the days when they weren't quite so avaricious, meaning, if we put money in your company, we're going to call the shots. They weren't that way at all. And they're not all that way now, but they really tend to be that way. Grew this business to about $70 million in revenues, 350 employees. And again, we had a marketing footprint really all over the world. We were purchased by Swiss Reinsurance Company, which is the second largest reinsurance company in the world. And it was a good deal for our shareholders. It was a good deal for everybody, except the Swiss. They didn't know what they were getting into. They weren't content to buy our company. They bought 28 other insurance-related software not software, anything, companies thinking they would have a big bag of tricks for their salespeople who were selling reinsurance. It didn't work out that way, but we'd been paid and have no complaints. I stayed with that company for a couple of years, but they were Gooney Birds. They had no idea what they were doing, and they were so convinced that they were smarter than anybody else on the planet that you were helpless to try to help them with it. So I moved on. I was able to do that, and then I got my taste of getting punched in the nose. The first company was this one that had been a very nice success, and it would have been better had I had a couple of body blows before that first one was over, because in my mind I had everything figured out. I could do no wrong, and believe me, you're waiting for a fall when you have that attitude, because I didn't know any better. So I certainly found out, and about 10 years ago, I started my own consultancy, which I still have, and also became a SCORE, which is a volunteer group that the Small Business Administration supports, that does pro bono, free consulting with any U.S. business. And that's been a lot of fun. It's kept me very current on what the current business problems are people are having. And then again, about 10 years, no, this is now about 12 years ago, I began teaching in Purdue's entrepreneurship program. And I fell in love with it right from the very beginning. I loved the concept, the fact that the instructors were entrepreneurs. They had a lot of freedom in the classroom. I really liked all that stuff, and I still like all that stuff. And I found that I really like students. I like being around them. I like teaching. We have fun in class kidding about Purdue and IU, and at the time, anytime there's a big game coming up between IU and Purdue, they start razzing me, and I say, you know what, you can say anything you want, but it doesn't matter who wins. I'm going to be just fine with it. So. And our program has certainly been a success. It's a little different from most programs. And the point is, we don't report to any school. We report directly to the provost. And the reason for that was that the two presidents back, Jischke, who was very instrumental in setting this up, wanted this program to be available to any student at Purdue who might wish to, now or in the future, set up a business, start a business. So that's why it doesn't belong to the School of Business. It doesn't belong to the School of Engineering. Stanford, the entrepreneurship program is within the Stanford Engineering, the graduate Stanford Engineering program. Any questions about that? Okay, let's move on. Okay, the first thing to talk about is something that came on the scene in about 2010. And in some respects, that's a long time ago. In some respects, that's a short time ago. But it was the advent of looking at a business model in deference to looking at a business plan. Because a business plan is this big document that is absolutely full of untested assumptions, whereas a business model is really a blueprint for how the business makes money. And until you've got that put together and settled, the rest of that stuff is irrelevant. It's a waste of time. So, and then at the same time, there was new work being done in what is a startup, how does a startup differ from other businesses. So many places have entrepreneurship, IU for example, entrepreneurship as part of the business school. And I think I don't think they have this attitude, but the attitude used to be that a startup business was a big business, only smaller. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's a very dangerous thing to think is true. So anyway, we're going to talk about these 4 different elements of being an entrepreneur, and at a very high level. The first is a wonderful book that we still use as a text for our second of 2 required courses. And it is a template. It's a template for any business. It consists of those 9 building blocks that you see up there, with the value proposition right in the middle. And on the left-hand side are things that have to do with cost, which are very important. On the right-hand side of the value proposition are things that have to do with bringing in money. So it's a way in one page to keep you focused on, if I decide to enhance, say, customer segments, I'm going to bring something out for another target audience. This is saying, uh-oh, tell me what I got to do over here to make that happen. Because you don't dare do one without the other. You got to figure out how to pay for stuff. And you can see this just gives you an idea of what this stuff deals with. And it forces a lot of conversation. Often people do it with sticky notes, but we have our classes do this. And then they go out and they interview people and they go through the whole shtick to figure out, do we have a valid idea? And here's an example of Car2Go, which was the car rental thing, the little 2-seaters. And this is showing what would happen. They had talked about having another product, which was a 4-seater. And so these are the things in red are things that they would have to consider before they went ahead with that. I'm not aware that they have gone ahead with that, so this may have convinced them that that wasn't a good idea. I don't know. Any questions about the business model canvas? Okay. Startup environment. A person by the name of Steve Blank has been very much involved in this and very much a trailblazer. This, to me, is really fascinating, and this kind of has to do with engineering. There was an article in the May of 2016 edition of the Harvard Business Review that basically said, hey, this whole idea of agile development, agile companies, is no longer just an IT tool. It is applicable to the biggest of big companies. And no, that's kind of just what this says. And you can kind of see what this talks about, but it's a radical alternative to the old command and control style model, which, in engineering was known as waterfall development. Totally different concept, because that was very specific on all the things you must do, in what order you must do them. Couldn't go on to the next one until you got there. And this was totally different. And it has begun to really break into not only different industries, but also into the executive parts of companies in terms of how they manage themselves. Now, John Deere has been using agile development for a few years, and this is what they found. They were working on a prototype of a new machine form, and they developed it in 8 months. And they said that if everything went perfectly in their previous traditional process, it would be 1.5 years at best, could be 2.5 to 3 years. So 8 months versus that is significant, and particularly in a money-making corporation. But the other thing that was very, very interesting was the team engagement and happiness went from the bottom third of company-wide scores to the top third, because they were using the Scrum method, where you have self-managing teams, number one, and you have short goals to accomplish in a short period of time, and they meet and they help each other figure out what do we have to do to stay on target. And quality improved. And then velocity, which is the amount of work that each sprint, this Scrum was called a sprint, accomplished, had increased by more than 200%. It more than doubled. Some had 400%, one had 800%. And when you think about a whole bunch of people working on a major project, that is a ton of money when productivity goes up by 200%, let alone 408. So the origins of what's called the Lean Launchpad was, first of all, There we go. First of all, Steve Blank, who talked about the Lean Startup, that morphed into, he was approached in 2015 by the National Science Foundation saying, we need your help, because by then, from about 2010 to 2015, this had enormous momentum going. And so the NSF came to Blank and said, look, we want you to develop this program for our people who are getting grant money. They're being funded by the NSF. And right now, over 61% of the applications get rejected, because the people looking at them say, there's no chance they're going to be successful. So we want you to come in and teach the people who are asking for money this program. And so they set up what was called the I-Corps, and you can see, and this data is old. This is at least 2 years old, but it's now being taught in 50 universities, and over 1,500 teams of sciences have taken it. And so lo and behold, a couple years back, they did a blind study of the results of the people who took the course and versus the previous people who it wasn't available to them. And remember, that one had a failure rate of 61%. This group had a success rate of about 86%. So that's an enormous difference. So, and then that's morphed into Hacking for Defense, which is just aimed at the Department of Defense, and it's modified to represent it's dealing with the government. Very interesting stuff. Let me go back one. Okay, here's what I wanted to show you. Here was an example of BCN Biosciences was a company who came to Blank because he'd been told, if you want money, you got to go learn this. So here's a 3-minute clip about their first day on the deal. That is his ranch in California.
On my books, I'm a surgical oncologist as well as an angel investor.
Sudeep Chakraborty, C-Level, BCN Biosciences.
Andrew Norris, BCN Biosciences, PI.
I get this call from the NCI program official. You should do this. There's this course. We'd like you to do it. You have been selected. Day one of our program. I'm sitting there sharing what we felt are experience was in our customer discovery. Steve Blank has this firing squad in the back of the room. Excuse me, sir. Stop, stop, stop. I'm like, huh? You know, that's a lot about what you know. I don't want to hear about what you know. I want to hear about what the customer is interested in. I want to hear about what the customer's concerns are. And this was like our first awakening. Wow. I thought I was thinking that way. And this is like our day one canvas. And we have one value proposition. Our drug protects normal tissue from radiation damage by 40 to 50%. And our customers are clearly radiation oncologists and maybe clinical oncologists. We thought that doctors will love it. Nobody was interested in normal tissue protection. Oh man, what do we do? Well, what is the value of this drug then? So we had to rephrase the way that we asked the question. All we have been asking people is normal protection of normal tissue from radiation damage important to you. Let's ask a different question. How much does that cost? This opened up a whole question of an unmet need. And through our maze of conversations with many people from regulatory to clinical realm, by week 6, we had a very busy canvas. At the end of the I-Core, we are now in the process of rephrasing our questions and really clearly understanding the need in that area and who the additional customers might be. Secondly, we have narrowed down what the customer wanted from our drug. Third, this thing that we didn't even come in to look at, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, is still on the table. Lastly, we have learned a remarkable process that allows us to be highly focused, and we have learned a tool of trade that we can now repeat. This has been a tremendous value to us.
And Blank is that way. We went to, he put on something in 2012, I think, at Stanford, and all of the instructors went out there. And he is that way. He's like a firing squad. Boy, he starts in and he's gonna make sure that he gets what he wants out of you. So. And so Hacking for Defense, as I say, was what they put together for the Department of Defense. And so he's very big on the focus that large corporations have a business model that's already met the tests. And so a large corporation doesn't want a bunch of wild-eyed inventors in there. They want people who can execute against a model that's been proven. And that is the major difference between a startup and a big company. And therefore, it rarely works for a big company to have an entrepreneurial section within the company. If they're going to do that, they need to have it outside because it's oil and water, and it is likely to end badly. Any questions about stuff so far? Okay. Customer discovery, basic elements, and we'll look at a couple of fairly brief slides, or rather presentations. This is kind of an intro.
For 21 years, I did 8 startups in a variety of industries. 2 semiconductor companies, enterprise software, video games, consumer electronics, military intelligence, and it was the most exciting thing I could imagine spending my life doing. But now for the last 14 years, I've been an educator. I've been how to think a different way about startups and how to build their companies in a very efficient way. Hi, I'm Steve Blank. I'm a retired serial entrepreneur. In this series, we're going to talk about 2 big ideas. How are startups different from large companies? And the second thing is something called the lean startup. And inside the lean startup, we're going to talk about the customer development process. We're going to talk about how to build a minimum viable product, how to build prototypes, and then we're going to talk about customer acquisition. How do you actually get out of the building, talk to customers, and then get them to use or buy your product?